Facebook as well. And I shall see you at the end of the session. If you have a lovely session. Thank you.
Thank you, Agatha.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 58th Power Dialogue. Today, we'll be looking at the extent to which service-based tariffs have been implemented in the industry. And I'm sure a few of us are wondering what are service-based tariffs? And luckily, we have Mr. Abba Tarab from NEC to assess the level of implementation of these tariffs in the industry. We also have today Mrs. Olajumoke Delano from Abuja Electricity Distribution Company. She heads the legal department. And we're expecting Mr. Nnemeka Ewelukwa, the managing director of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trader PLC, who will be joining us as we move along. So I'd like to call on the panelists to introduce themselves and give short opening remarks to kickstart the program. I'll call on Mr. Abba Tarab, who is the General Manager of Market Competition and Rates at the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. Welcome, Mr. Abba Tarab. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this session, which you've been organizing for quite a while and helps in providing a good knowledge base for the industry. So I am Abba Ibrahim Tarab, Deputy General Manager, not General Manager, Deputy General Manager, Market Competition and Rates with the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. Service-based tariff, it's a wonderful idea that started quite a long process, right from the started from the FGN's Power Sector Recovery Program, which was set to have a reset for the power sector, especially regarding ensuring financial viability for the sector, as well as improving power supply to customers. So as part of it, the distribution companies were requested to make a submission of their performance improvement plan. And that performance improvement plan was forwarded to the Commission as part of an extraordinary tariff review application. So based on that, a series of consultation process took place, and the outcome of the consultation clearly stated what customers want and what the stakeholders want. They want to pay for electricity based on the quality of service they are getting. And then today we have the service-based tariff, which have been implementing since November last year. Well, actually started September, but there was a pause in October, but then kicked back in November, and we have been implementing, and we've seen significant progress in terms of energy throughput from the generation companies. We've recorded several milestones within this period since we've started. Most of the peaks for generation were recorded since the SBT kicked in. So it means it's actually yielding the desired results as expected as part of the objectives of the Power Sector Recovery Program, and also supporting in terms of improving financial viability of the sector. So probably I may want to stop here so that maybe as we go along, I can add one or two things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abba Tarab. I'd now like to call on Mrs. Olajumoke Delano to give her introductory remarks, and then we'll kickstart the next session. Thank you.
So good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, so Jumoke Delano is my name. I'm the Director of Legal Services for AEDC, and we have been one of the recipients of the service-based tariff responsible for implementing it with the end user, which are the customers. And as Mr. Abba mentioned, we've been on this process for a while now, and I must say that I commend the efforts of the regulators to adapt a system that works for Nigerian electricity supply industry as a whole. It's reasonable. AEDC. So we have been supporting this initiative since it was implemented, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Delano. So I'm just going to give a brief run through before we move to the next session because we have quite a bit of time. The service-based tariffs generally are based on hours of supply availability, which determines guaranteed levels of electricity service by the discos, the distribution company. So essentially, the tariffs will only be reviewed or increased based on the quality of service distribution companies provide to end users. It's not like the previous tariffs structure we had, where it was based on the inbuilt sculpting, which allowed the discos to under-recover their allowable revenue in the early years and over-recover in later years. Now, it's based on your service level, the performance of your service, how satisfied are the customers with the quality of electricity they are receiving, and how many hours of supply are you able to provide to them based on the different customer bands and categories. And I'm sure Mr. Abatarab would take us through some of those issues as we go along. So in terms of the parameters for disco services, there are certain expectations that the regulator and even generally the government expects the discos to meet. So in terms of hours of supply, this speaks to the availability, the amount of hours they're able to supply the different bands of customers. And of course, the discos have service obligations to meet, which if they fail to do so, they are supposed to be sanctioned. And again, Mr. Abatarab will be telling us about the level of implementation of some of these sanction and penal mechanisms that are in place. Another parameter the discos are assessed based on is reliability, which is defined by the frequency and duration of interruptions in the system. So they will be assessed based on that as well. And then the quality, of course, this is measured by the voltage and operating frequency of the network. So these parameters make up the services that are expected from the discos under these service-based tariffs. So we'll be moving on now to the next session because we're still expecting the MD of MBET, and once he comes in, we would take a little break to introduce him. But I think we can move on to the next session. Please, you keep your mics on mute and all phones should be on silent as we progress. So I'm going to start with Mr. Abatarab. Mr. Abatarab, the World Bank, when they put forward the power sector recovery program, we know that one of their expectations was for the discos to meet their performance improvement plans. And in effect, through those plans will now form the basis of an increase in electricity tariffs if they are able to meet those performance improvement plans. So sort of like their KPIs, their key performance indicators. Now, how pleased is the World Bank with the industry's direction on tariffs? Would you say the service-based tariffs are timely? Is it achieving the purpose for which it has been set out to achieve? We would like to hear your thoughts on that, please.
Thank you very much. Although I believe World Bank will be in a better place to speak for themselves, but I will speak for what we've experienced as part of this power sector recovery program and the implementation of SBT that came through it. Like I mentioned earlier, as part of the objectives of the power sector recovery program is to ensure financial viability of the sector is improved, as well as also available energy that will be delivered to customers on a consistent basis and on an incremental basis is improved and increasing. And then with that, the discos were required to submit their performance improvement plan to see how to ensure that. And the other aspect is government's policy to transit to cost-reflective tariffs as services are improving correspondingly. So based on that, the submissions were received from the 11 electricity distribution company. Probably Abuja will make one or two comments on that. And based on that, in line with the Electric Power Sector Reform Act and the tariff methodology, the discourse filed for an application for an extraordinary tariff review to ensure that these plans are captured in the tariffs and also in their revenue requirements and also reflected in their tariff. The PIP, the commission came up with a guideline that the performance improvement plan, which is called PIP, is focused on an output-based approach where the plans should be targeting in terms of improvement in service levels, primarily energy throughput, that is more energy should be delivered to customers, and also quality of service in terms of availability and also duration of interruptions and number of interruptions. So based on that, the initial submission was made and in November 2019, and it was published by the Commission on our website and in 2 national dailies, and general public, customers, and other interested stakeholders were required to make their comments. Subsequent to that, a public hearing was held in each of the discourse to consider the comments that came up from the participants or stakeholders review of the PIP and extraordinary tariff review application, as well as the application itself. And we had a number of feedback. And one of the key feedback that came out from it was that, look, a number of customers are very much ready, and most customers are very much ready to pay the appropriate tariff for the appropriate service. And that's where the issue of SBT came up. So, and mostly customers now measure service, that is the large number of customers, mostly residential, measure service quality in terms of hours of availability. So, and then for the industrial customers in terms of voltage level is key so that they are, and also the reliability in terms of hours of supply and less frequency of interruption. So all these were captured in the submission, and then the commission and the hearings were held between February and March in 2020, and the commission came up with the order on transition to service-based tariff in April, which we required the disclosure to come up to update and make a revised submission of their PIP to reflect the needs of customers so that we can go ahead and review the application in a more holistic manner. And based on that, new applications were submitted in May, and they were reviewed in June and October, all to the time it was approved in September. So based on all this, it's key. And prior to that, we had to ensure that service levels are guaranteed by the discourse. The Nigerian electricity value chain as a link between generation, transmission, distribution, and at the back
I think Mr. Abba Tarab is having some technical issues. So I think we'll come back to him pending when the issue is resolved. So I'll just move on to Mrs. Delano because Mr. Tarab spoke about the PIPs, and of course, Mrs. Delano, as the Director Legal in ADC, is in the front burner of how these performance improvement plans are being put together and submitted. So, Mrs. Delano, in the approved PIPs, we know that ADC had a target of 26% to reduce its losses within 5 years. How feasible is this within the service-based tariff regime?
Thank you, Mr. Hamo. Good question you ask. If you look at the PIP document, it does state, the targets that each disco is supposed to achieve. It also states the revenue that is required in order to, the funding that is required in order to be able to achieve those targets. It states capital expenditure, it states operational expenditure, and of course the timeline in which these targets will be achieved. So definitely all things being equal, having all the indices, the assumptions that we have put in the PIP being realized, yeah, it is an achievable target. Yeah.
Okay, that's very encouraging for the industry. Would you say should the customers expect further tariff increments for AEDC and even other discos to attain their respective targets?
Well, the issue of tariffs is one that Mr. Abba can speak very well on, but I would like to say that there is a methodology for changing tariffs. There is the minor review, under the MITO, there's the minor review order that is issued every 6 months, depending on changes in the variables that would affect those tariffs. So those, you know, I mean, apart from the service-based tariffs, these the minor review orders have been operational. So every 6 months, depending on changes in inflation, in gas prices, in foreign exchange, in generation capacity, based on changes that are minus or plus 5%, NEC would issue an order advising, after engagement with the discos on the changes that, will be required to take place. So it's not necessarily, and invariably, the tariffs should go down. Once you are able to put in the improvements required to reduce losses, then the tariffs will eventually go down. But as I said, it's not just about the service-based tariffs. There are other factors that weigh in on the pricing of electricity.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Delano. So I have another question. We know that under the performance agreement, the discos are expected, one of the targets they're expected to meet, apart from metering and network improvement, is to also increase their customer base. And this is very key with the service-based tariffs because you want to be able to classify your customers into the right band. So what plans does AEDC have in terms of, and what efforts are going into enumeration and monitoring of your customer base as you strive to increase that customer base?
Okay, let me start with the issue of enumeration. And enumeration is an ongoing process, especially in a place where it's not fully built up. If your coverage area is in an area that is not fully built up, then you must, of course, continue to enumerate. And even if you are in an area that is built up, then people change, so you must keep on updating the quality of the information that you have within your database. So what AEDC has done, our structure is to deploy enumeration officers to each of the area offices who keep track on new developments and ensure that these new developments are, brought into the customer database, their data is entered in. And one of the ways you can also do this is through the marketers that, submit, distribute bills eventually, and all those things are going to become electronic. But we have brought it down to a granular level that allows us to keep track. In a place like FCT, there are so many estates being developed, all over the coverage area, even in the other regions, other states that are within the AEDC coverage area. So while there was an unblock enumeration process to comply with next deadlines, after complying with those deadlines, we've gone ahead to domesticate and localize the enumeration officers to ensure that they keep on updating the customer database.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Delano. I'll come back to Mr. Tarab because we lost him for some minutes. Mr. Tarab, I have a question regarding, I was asking about the timeliness of the service-based tariffs. I know 2020 cannot really be regarded as a year in the way we're thinking of the years we've gone by. So how has COVID impacted the implementation of these service-based tariffs? And which now leads me to ask, was it a timely decision? Should we have waited, or are we on the right track to cost reflectivity?
I think we are on the right track. Yeah, it's 2020, of course, the impact of COVID, the country and globally, the economy is still trying to fully ascertain the impact and still devising ways to address this challenge. But I think the overall, right from inception, when the first MITO was approved in 2008, it has been a 15-year tariff path towards attaining cost reflectivity, that is in rebalancing the tariffs. At the time of the reform in 2005, tariffs were grossly below the cost reflective levels. And that's why, in line with the MITO, the Commission came up with the MITO methodology as provided in the Electric Power Sector Reform Act, Section 76, that we should come up with one or two methodologies that will ensure tariffs in the industries are cost reflective, are fair to customers, and also reduce or phase out cross subsidies and reduce undue discrimination. So based on that, the MITO methodology, after detailed consultation, was approved. And the first MITO in 2008 provided a 15-year tariff path with minor reviews every annually and major reviews every 5 years. But as we are going, the industry works within an economy and works within the overall Nigerian system. So as challenges come up, whether it's COVID or changes in exchange rates or some delay in implementation, it's a process. And that these processes have been going consistently. And with the MITO 2 in 2012, that led to the privatization, we've seen quite a number of investments coming in from these private sectors at the generation, transmission, so at generation and distribution level, and also at the gas level, because most of the generation companies have to sign agreements with gas suppliers for gas to be available to generate consistently. So it's a process that has been started, and like I mentioned, in the federal government's power sector recovery program that was approved first in March 2017, didn't envision that COVID is coming, but there's a process to reset the power sector. And part of that process was the request, because we issued the guidelines for discourse in 2019 to apply for the PIP and submit the extraordinary tariff review application. Following that, the submission, the consultations were done. Immediately as we concluded the consultation for the PIPs, that was at the end of February and March. That was when the COVID lockdown came in, but work continued. The discourse, the commission have been working to deliver the PIPs. And of course, we have to implement with the expectation of customers. So these expectations were already given to the sector through the consultation process before the full advent of COVID. And as a result of that, I mean, we went ahead to implement. Yes, we had to apply the COVID principles in meetings. So most of the meetings were done on Zoom and the rest, but several engagements were done, especially with the discourse and between discourse and TCN, to ensure that the commitments given by the discourse in the SBT to meet customer expectations are met. And that's why service level agreements were signed. In addition to that, I was trying to state in order to strengthen and give impetus to the implementation of SBT, the federal government approved the National Mass Metering Program, which is to ensure that all customers are metered within the next 2-3 years, and these meters are provided. And between then and now, over nearly getting to 400,000 meters have already been installed, and installation that is going on as we speak for a number of the disco average weekly installation of about 6,000 to about 6,000 meters. So it's ongoing, and more improvement will be made. And as customers keep getting service, but also customers will provide feedback on the service levels they're getting. There is a monitoring mechanism put in place where the commission gets data from the discos feeder data, whether it's 33 kV feeders or 11 kV feeders, depending on where these feeders are. And we're monitoring and examining and ensuring that make sure customers get feeders, and where they don't, once the appropriate computations are done, that will be captured as we go forward in the next minor review. So I think it's a COVID, yes, it brought its own challenges, but the sector will operate within or outside COVID, but definitely within the COVID rules. So we ensure that all the meetings were done and all the agreements were signed, and as much as possible, apply the COVID rules in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarab. So speaking of measuring implementation and the impact of the service-based tariffs, how are these, given the importance, because the tariffs are commitment-based, the discos have their own commitments to meet in terms of quality of service and reliability. The customers on their own are not also left out. They also have their own commitments as customers and end users of electricity to make sure it's being used in a fair and safe manner. So based on that and based on the importance of these service-based tariffs, not just to Nigeria, but even also to the international community in terms of all the support that is being provided, what measures are taken to review the effectiveness of these service-based tariffs? Because it's one thing to put tariffs out there, and it's another thing for the results to actually be witnessed and assessed and ascertained. So can you please address us in terms of how are these tariffs being measured? What measures are taken to review the service-based tariffs? And then to also add to that, if you can, you spoke about monitoring customer feedback. How effective has that been in terms of the monitoring how the customers react to the service base? What are the real-time mechanisms that the Commission has put in place to monitor payments? Because the customers have commitments to pay. How are these being monitored by the Commission? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Probably Olajumoke will be in a better place to state how they monitor, because I mean, that's dealing with their customers. They provide service for most of the customers that are on prepaid meters. They make their vending, and the discos usually have mechanisms to have query or issue red flags where a customer has not vended over a long period of time, to see whether it was a technical challenge or there are other issues beyond the control of the customers. While for customers that are on postpaid, mostly that is the customers estimated through capping, the Commission, as part of the SBT, also revised the existing capping rates to meet the service levels customers are getting. So customers that are on band A, their caps were set based on tariffs on band A, while customers on band E, their caps reflect or tariffs for band E. And based on this, then the customers, for those customers on postpaid, they are billed by the discos at the end of every month, and they make their payments, and there are other enforcement protocols the discos follow in line with the customer service standards to ensure customer payments are enforced. But for generally our own review of the performance in terms of monitoring the service levels, we get hourly information on every day, 24 hours on the feeder meters. So meters are read every day to see availability on those meters, and then communicated to assess the level of compliance, and where compliance is in line with the order, where compliance is not as expected. Subsequently, a compensation mechanism is in place that will be implemented as we go. Probably the disco will state a little further. In addition to that, we are coming up with further means where the customers, apart from the normal complaint channel that they can complain to the disco, they are supposed to get this service level they are not getting, which can be escalated to the Commission through the forum offices in each of the state capitals, or directly to the Commission through the website of the Commission or through letters. There is also a crowdsourcing feedback app that is being developed so that customers within a particular feeder can now state or give direct feedback to the commission on hours of supply they're getting, and then subsequent compensation where it is validated to be true can be then met in case they paid for higher tariffs, but they got a lower service quality as expected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tarab, for that insightful feedback. Mrs. Delano, I have a question for you regarding the actual implementation in terms of how customers meet, how you assess the level at which AEDC meets its targets. So I know that in some other jurisdictions, for example, I think it's in Bangladesh, the discos are mandated to publish their KPIs. So similar to your performance improvement plan, publish it on their websites, and that way they are able to also put forward the level at which they have attained their targets and expectations. One of them being, of course, improving technical quality of services, amongst others. Now we know that indexing is non-existent at the moment in the market. So what monitoring mechanisms do the DISCOs, particularly AEDC, have in place to ensure that the electricity supply to consumers meets the agreed service levels?
Okay, so AEDC is very service-oriented and customer-focused, and we have established various channels. Social media is very popular now. We have entrenched social media channels through which we can get feedback from our customers. That's feedback that we receive customer facing. So we have different handles where customers can reach us, other than even the traditional channels of a call center. We have a very well equipped and resourced 24/7 call center where customers can connect with us in order to let us know what challenges that they are facing. And we have a customer care app that also ensures that these calls are documented and tracked until resolution. That's from the customer facing side. There's also an app that was recently launched, which we are getting our customers to sign on to, which allows them to do a lot of self-service and also connect with AEDC with respect to notifying us of their complaints. Then just like Abba said, we are obliged to report each day to NERC. There is an hour by hour recording of the energy on each feeder. And so it started with a spreadsheet, migrated to a portal now, and eventually will be automated, because even the mechanisms for automating the reporting process are part of the CAPEX financing for year one under AEDC's PIP. So we comply with that requirement of ensuring that there is a report to send to NERC on a daily basis. What the order from NERC requires is that after 60 days, then you review the performance as against commitments in order to determine whether a DISCO has fallen short of their commitment. Now, when the DISCO receives any feedback from NERC, you would now want to validate the data that is inside the report, and then establish whether the fault is as a result of the DISCO or TCN, because that's also important. And to this extent, a service level agreement was signed between each DISCO and TCN with respect to the issues of frequency of disruption, stability of service, uninterrupted service. So we have a service level between the Transmission Company of Nigeria and the DISCOs that is supposed to also track. Those commitments are also entered into that agreement, and it's monitored between TCN and the distribution company.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Delano. Mr. Abatarab, So far we know pre the service-based tariffs, there was the issue of market remittance, low market remittance in the industry. We also know that NEC monitors the compliance levels of discos, not just from an operational perspective, but also from a remittance perspective. So would you say that the payment performance of discos has improved since the implementation of these service-based tariffs? Has there been significant progress in attending to, or even let me say, dissolving the liquidity crisis that plagued the industry?
Yeah, I think that's the whole crust of the SBT and the Power Sector Recovery Program of the FGN. So basically, as I mentioned, part of the key objectives of the Power Sector Recovery Program is to ensure financial viability of the power sector. That means that the sector can take care of itself without interventions coming from government over a period of time. So basically, now with the SBT, currently we're saying customer migration is one of the key fundamentals that will lead to change in tariff experience by customers. So as part of the PIP submitted by the DISCOs and what was approved by the Commission, the DISCO will be implementing and investing about 178 billion naira annually from now to within the next 5 years. And as they're investing in this, in the DISCOs at the various feeders and DT levels, that is the distribution transformers and all the network investments, is to ensure the attainment of that customers are migrated from lower bands to higher bands. So that is key to the tariff review. And based on what has been approved, we're expecting that customers that are now band B, band C, band D, band E will all gradually transit to band A tariff class. And as these customers are transiting to upper tariff classes, because your service level has improved from either, if you're in band C, from 12 hours per day to band B, that will be getting like 16 hours per day, then you'll be paying the corresponding tariff for band B. So with that, there'll be more recovery of the revenue required by the DISCO and less intervention from the federal government. And that will mean higher remittances, that is payment of the energy bills for the generating companies through the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, MBET. So since the implementation, we've seen significant improvement in terms of revenue collection, in terms of billing efficiency, even though when the SBT started, we had some little hiccups either in terms of suspension once or twice, but at least overall, we've seen an incremental improvement in terms of collections, in terms of payment upstream. And that's why we're pushing further now, because initially we thought, okay, generation, we don't have much issues. Apparently with the implementation of SBT, with more energy intake to serve customers at these bands and the various service bands, and with more delivery of the distribution companies on their service commitments, we see that there's need now to prop up generation to ensure that there's available gas to meet these demands. And this is the next phase of the implementation that we are going ahead. But as we see now, that has improved. Collection has improved, remittance has improved significantly. And probably, unfortunately, the MBET MD is not here, but maybe if he was here, we would have corroborated that position. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarab. So the expectation is once all customers move to the band A, it's expected that the tariffs would go down, because obviously you would be closer to your allowable revenue. So with time, as you improve in efficiency, the tariffs would reduce. And speaking of tariffs, Mrs. Delano, many have argued that an increase in tariff before an improved ability to collect revenue is a classic example of putting the cart before the horse. How would you respond to this, please?
That's an interesting one. But I don't think this is the case. I think my video has been stopped, so maybe it says the host has stopped the video. So what has happened is, even before this service-based tariff, I mean, there are accompanying initiatives which would facilitate increase in revenue. And one of this is metering. Metering is important. The federal government has invested a significant, amount of money in the metering process under the National Mass Metering Program. Before that, there was the MAP. These are all avenues that allow, incremental revenue, because when you have a meter in place, then you are less likely to argue with your customer on the integrity of the bill or the amount that has been charged. The customer also has the ability to control usage. So that is one of the things that metering does. It really eliminates a lot of angst between the distribution company and the consumers. And so with the metering initiatives that have been put in place, I mean, those are to facilitate, increase in tariffs. And then there's also the capping of an estimated bill. So there is a balance. I believe the regulator tried to ensure there was a balance in the incremental tariffs in order to motivate the rollout of meters, the installation of meters countrywide. That capping of estimated bills is put in place so that as you meter people, then they migrate to their actual, the actual consumption, and they're able to manage. So I think it's the initiatives have actually been synchronous. Yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tarab, there is this position that has been put out there, and it's actually based on facts that about 80% of customers are actually unaware of which band they fall into, which category of the band they fall into. So what would you say, how has NEC ensured that at least a majority of customers are aware of the tariff bands that they fall into? What has been done in terms of consumer enlightenment? And I know the discos also have a part to play, but from the regulator's perspective, what steps have NEC taken to ensure that customers are aware of their respective bands? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The customers' first point of call in all this engagement with the distribution companies, who are the main contracting partners with them. So as part of the effort from the Commission has given directives for the distribution companies to ensure that customers are aware of their meters. That means by publishing on their website the relevant feeders these customers belong to. And all of the discos, the Commission has gone ahead to verify that customers can actually go to the website of the discos and check. So those are the customers that can be able to access online services, while customers that can't access online services, other communication devices, either through radio jingles and other things can be done. But simply, it's for those customers, if you go to either go to vend, if it's a prepaid customer, the meter and the tariff classification will be given. While for those that are on postpaid in their bills, it will be issued the clear tariff band they are in and the feeders they belong to, as well as then in their receipts for the meters when they pay for the, not for meters, for electricity when they pay for the bills, that's also reflected. So which we've gone ahead to monitor this compliance by the discourse, and probably AEDC can make one or two comments on that. So it's a continuous process, and as these feeders being upgraded, there's a key requirement that those customers will be consulted before they are upgraded to higher feeders, so that they just don't go to vend and see, oh, their bill has changed, so that surprises or shock will not be there. Or if the customers are on postpaid, they should not just wake up and see the bill or they're on a higher band instead of to what they were. So they're supposed to consult, and after that consultation, the Commission will be involved, and the Commission will give its approval before such migration of customers will be done. So I think it's a continuous process, but basically they have to engage with the distribution companies, who are the main parties supplying services, We're there to monitor if there are any infraction to ensure appropriate compliance and improve service delivery to customers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tarab. Mrs. Delano, speaking of customer engagement and monitoring your efficiency with regard to relating with customers, with this implementation of these service-based tariffs, how would you rate the collection efficiency of the discos, particularly AEDC, in terms of how efficient has the distribution company been in collecting revenues from customers that have been billed?
Well, the figures that are in the public domain show about a 66% increase in collection efficiency. So that is significant. That is certainly, a significant number. And AEDC is committed, is an organization that is committed to honoring its obligations. That's what we do in AEDC. And in terms of engagement with customers is continuous. There's no end. You never get to the point where you say, oh, we're fully engaged. No, it's a continuous process. And we have different platforms for engagement, like what was mentioned in terms of the vending, like the vending receipts. So when you get your bill also shows you what is your tariff class, what band you are on, and if you go and vend, you also get that. If you call customer care, once you have your meter number or your customer number, they will tell you, what is your tariff band. But as I said, is there room for more? Absolutely. It's a continuous process, especially as this is a process that is evolving. The idea is to continue to improve supply and hours of supply in order to migrate customers to higher bands and improve the service levels. So we must and we will continue to engage. Thank you.
Thank you. And just as an add-on, would you say that the tariff regime has improved the cash flow of AEDC and possibly other discos? I know you can't speak for the others, but particularly AEDC.
Well, the issue of cash flow is affected by a couple of factors. It's affected by how well you are doing. Right now we're operating in a framework that restricts your payments to a certain waterfall. So there's a prescribed waterfall and order in which payments are supposed to be made. So the more you make, the more you collect from your customers, the more is available to you. There is also the OPEX facility, which is a liquidity, is supposed to shore up or support the liquidity of the disco it's a 10-year facility, but draw down, I think, within about 2 years. So now that may increase your cash flow in the short term, but when you start to pay back, then it depends. And so if you are performing optimally as expected, then you would see an increase in cash flows. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go back to a question or a comment Mr. Tarab made so that you can speak to it, because really the first point of interface is for the customers is the discourse. So how has AEDC handled or sensitized its customers regarding their respective tariff bands? Because we know that has been an issue in terms of customers complaining that they don't even know which tariff band they fall into. What measures have been taken by AEDC to sensitize its customers so they are aware of their respective bands?
Okay, the measures that we have taken include ensuring that the information is published on the website for the different feeders. But there may also be a challenge such that, I don't even know the name of my feeder, so that is, so how do I know that this feeder is the one that serves me? So the customer care lines have been also very helpful in helping customers make the linkage between their meter numbers, their or their account numbers with the relevant feeders, with the relevant bands that serve them. So we also engage on multiple channels. So you don't need to make a call. This is a data-driven society where many people, especially the younger ones, are on the internet. And so we also engage. You don't have to make a call. Our customer care is linked to all our social media handles. So you can reach AEDC through multiple platforms. Once you have the key information, which is what's your meter number, what is your account number if you are a postpaid customer, you can reach out to us, and that information can be provided readily.
Thank you so much for that answer. Mr. Tarab, in terms of complaint handling, what processes are in place by the Commission for consumers who do not receive their required service levels? Because the Commission stands as the mediator. So what complaints processes have been put in place to address complaints of customers who have not received their anticipated levels of service?
Thank you very much again. Like I mentioned, before SBT or during SBT, we have several regulations on customer service standards and customer complaint handling systems that the distribution companies are required to put in place. So primarily, if a customer is not getting the required service, the first is to reach out to the Discourse Customer Service Center, where they can lodge the complaint. And if the complaint is not addressed, like I mentioned earlier, we have a forum office, which we have one in each of the state capitals. It can be escalated and through either email or any written complaint, so that issue, the Discourse will be asked to come and address why the minimum service level expected by this customer is not met. Then we have other channels in terms of reaching directly to the Commission through the website of the Commission or through emails to complaints@nec.gov.ng. That is complaints@nec.gov.ng. That is the email. And also on our website, you can lodge complaint. We have Facebook and Twitter channels to make lodge such complaints, which can be escalated. Will still be forwarded for the Discord to provide an explanation why these customers are not getting the minimum service. And if it falls within the provision that over a period of 60 days, on average, that customer did not get the minimum hours of supply, then protocol in terms of what compensation and how compensation will be paid to this customer will be asked for the Discord to go and implement. So I think that is what the Commission is doing, and the process of monitoring the hourly energy delivered by the Discourse each month. We're compiling such reports. For the first period now, we have already commenced the process of minor review. So for those that have not reflected, those ones in paying the necessary compensation to customers, that will be applied in the minor review process. Subsequently, as we fully automate the meters at the feeder level and the service-based level, so I mean these things will be done automatically, and then customers will be compensated on an automatic basis if they don't get the minimum service level over a period of 60 days on average. So that's what the Commission is putting in place. And like I mentioned earlier, we are also coming up with a crowd sourcing, of information. That is where customers from various feeders will have opportunity to escalate their complaints for Commission to have a quick response to review and see what's happening. And if the situation is real, then appropriate compensation process will be instituted so that customers will be graded accordingly to the service level they're getting, and the tariff they'll be paying should also be commensurate to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarab. Thank you so much for the enlightening session. So we're now going to move to the Q&A. If you have any questions, kindly raise up your hands in terms of direct questions to the panelists. Otherwise, please put your questions in the Q&A box. So I would start pending when I would start with the question in the chat box to Mr. Tarab. It says, when will discos begin to remit 100% to MBET? And when will government subsidy end? Will that happen this year?
Like I mentioned, the discos have submitted various performance improvement plans and migration, customer migration commitments, which the commission has approved. So it may not be within this year, but as quickly as customers are migrated upwards, it means most of the tariff will be fully cost reflective. So there will be less and less need for government intervention in the sector. So the discos will be paying fully. So as we speak now, the current tariffs customers are paying is about 78% of the cost reflective tariffs, which is a significant improvement from that is the aggregate revenue the disco is collecting. Of course, not all the customers are paying up to 78%, but at least those in band A and B are largely paying about that level or something very close to that level. But then others are not paying up to that. So as we migrate customers each 6 months to higher service bands, this amount will reduce. So hopefully by the next review in July, a number of customers will be moved to higher bands and they'll be getting higher improved services. Based on that, the improvement and payment upstream will increase. So I think that is part of it. And as mentioned earlier by Delano, that there are also minor reviews, which takes care of other variables outside the control of the utilities and also the regulator. Things like changes in inflation and exchange rates. So these are outside the control of the sector, so which you won't now hold an operator accountable for that. So although we have a lead time before it's been applied in the tariff, but during minor reviews, we now update that. So I think it's a continuous process. It's a gradual process. And I think with the consistent improvement and in service to customers and migration of feeders, customers to higher feeders, then that will eventually get there in a no distant time, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarab. So we have a few questions in the Q&A box. There's a question from Mr. Caleb Adebayo, and his question relates to the incessant blackouts that have been taking place within the country, both caused by grid collapse and partially sometimes from challenges faced by the discos. So his question is, when these blackouts reduce electricity supply to the consumers significantly, what solution do the customers have?
Is that directed to me? Okay, I'll just make an attempt. I want to believe not what solutions do customers have or what will be the level of compensation to customers, or because if there is no supply because it's not the disco's fault, there was system collapse. But this system collapse don't happen every single day. So they happen once in like 3 months or so. And the ones we've seen of recent, like I mentioned earlier, because of the implementation of SBT, more energy is being delivered to customers. And now some of the generators that were not operating at an optimal level are now being pushed to their optimal limits. So, and that's why some of them are failing, and some maybe because of limitation in gas. That's why we have a process of making sure that there is also SLA commitments in terms of making some of these contracts effective, that is the generation companies, so that they can sign effective agreements with gas suppliers with the same line of commitments in the SLA between TCN and DISCOs. So where they are not available, they'll pay compensation that we paid all the way downstream in terms of customers that did not get the service. So I think that's what we're putting in place, and which we believe will be implemented very soon, and that will take care of such challenges and any other challenges. But other challenges, if it's outside the DISCO's control, was because of TCN's fault, then TCN will compensate DISCO for the compensation that the DISCO will pay to the customer. But for the customer, all he knows, if I'm in band A, I should get band A service. And when I pay for band A service, I don't get band A service, I get band B services, I should be compensated accordingly. I think that's the position of the Commission, and that is made very clear to all operators within the industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I guess the second leg of the question speaks to, it doesn't state so, but from inference, speaks to where the fault is maybe partly occasioned by the discos. How would NEC enforce performance or punish non-performance in such a situation?
I mean, there are several ways of the enforcement. One, through the tariffs, because if you are expected to deliver 8 hours of supply, that is with this number of kilowatt hours at this rate, for you to recover your revenue requirement. When they don't do that already, the distribution company is losing money. But in addition to that, if it was because of the DISCO's fault that such minimum service levels were not met, then the DISCO will compensate the customer accordingly. Where it's as a result of fault coming from transmission company, then such compensation will pass through, and the compensation paid by the DISCO to the customer in the first instance will now be refunded to the DISCO by TCN. So also want to follow it through all the way to the generation level. So we have, like I mentioned earlier, for this first phase, we believe by the time we carry out the minor review, such implementation will be done. But once the automation of the meter readings have been completed, that will be done on a monthly basis. If over a period of 6 months, a customer in a DISCO did not get the minimum service levels, then such customer will be compensated on a monthly basis. That is getting a refund either for the energy paid with higher tariff when the service level they got is much lower. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Tarab. Mrs. Delano, I would direct this question to you. What is the role of IPPs in the DISCO's PIPs? Are they a part of the plan?
Well, with the IPPs, I believe there are regulations that NEC has established that allow DISCOs to enter into bilateral arrangements with these IPPs, subject to obtaining the appropriate approvals for them to provide additional energy, if these are going to be outside what has been contracted to embed. So that is, there is an opportunity for IPPs to enter into bilateral arrangements with the distribution companies, yes, to supply additional power.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have a participant who wants to speak directly and raise their question. So please go ahead, and Wazeb.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Actually, thank you for providing me the opportunity. My question from the honorable panelist is that how the risk is distributed. Actually, I'm meaning the market risk among the seller and the buyer. This is my first question. And the second question is either in Nigeria, the wire and the sale business are separated or they are treated by the same discourse. So thank you. These are my questions.
Thank you so much. So I think the first question speaks to the distribution of risk, and the second one speaks to whether the distribution companies conduct. So I know in some jurisdiction, retail and supply functions are undertaken by one entity, while in some other jurisdictions it's separated. But in Nigeria, we haven't really advanced to the point where those functions are actually separated. So as it stands, the industry is still at what we call the transitional electricity market stage. And I'm sure by the medium term stage, which anticipates retail competition, we would have what we call retail suppliers who would also work alongside with the distribution companies. In terms of the distribution of risks, I would allow Mr. Tarab to take that question.
Thank you very much. That was a good attempt on the second question. For the distribution of risk, normally the principle is that risks are placed on the parties that are best able to manage those risks. So there are risks that are within the distribution company's levels, which they can be able to manage. And those risks are efficiency, operational risks. So they manage that, and the service, minimum service levels that they commit those risks, and any penalties or sanctions that may come from that will be borne by the distribution companies or the utilities. For the risks that are outside their control, like issues like inflation, change in price of gas and the rest, or cost of generation, these are pass-through risks that are passed to the customers. So, I mean, the customers, like in any other sector where there are changes in macroeconomic variables, mostly commodities prices change, like we've been experiencing now in Nigeria with the level of inflation. So, but of course, it's managed so that it's not, we don't have volatility in tariffs frequently. So there's a delay, there's a lag before that is implemented. After 6 months, you implement those increase. So within that period, the DISCO is managing the risk for about until the minor review is done, which is a formulaic change in the tariff parameters and assumptions. So I think that's the way to see it. So risks of in terms of payment is customer's risk. So where customer is not paying, the customer service standards has made provision where customers will be disconnected for not honoring their payment obligation for services they received from the distribution company. Just to follow up on the second question, yes, currently the licenses given to the distribution companies, the distribution companies have 2 licenses as part of, like she adequately stated, in the transition phase of the market. So they do both distribution and sell services, that is retail of electricity. As we move on to the medium term, that will be separated, but we've already started separating some aspects of that with the introduction of eligible customer market or segments, where customers need not to buy electricity through the distribution companies, that customers that have higher capacity of at least 2 megawatt hour per hour capacity to consume electricity to that level, they can then contract directly with generating companies, not necessarily to the distribution company. If they are connected to the distribution network, then they will pay the distribution company distribution use of system service only for the distribution service they're offering. But the retail aspect is already off that market. So I think that's just to add on that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tarab. So, Mrs. Delano, there is a question here that I would like you to take. It says, how can the service-based tariff work in areas where there are no prepaid meters? I know you spoke about metering earlier.
Okay. The service-based tariff is designed to work, within the whole Nigerian electricity supply industry. But what NEC has done to moderate the impact of this is the band D and E customers, there was no increase in tariffs for them. So while bands A, B, and C experienced a tariff increase when the service-based tariff was implemented, bands D and E, which are likely to fall within the areas which the commentator has mentioned, did not experience an increase in tariff. In addition, what has happened, even that NEC tried to do to balance, is also to introduce a capping for even those areas that experienced an increase, bands A to C, if they were not metered, then they are under the capping. So that is to incentivize the distribution companies to meter. In addition, the federal government of Nigeria has invested huge sums in the National Mass Metering Program. So these are all incentives to motivate the quick rollout, just as I mentioned earlier. Distribution companies are not happy when a customer is not metered. You can't imagine the amount of effort it requires to distribute a bill, to go and enforce the collection of your money, to disconnect the customer. It does require a lot of manpower, resource, and effort, and repeated visits to a particular premises or to particular premises. So if you have a meter, it really simplifies the whole process. It's in the interests of the sector that everybody's metered. It's in the interest of the distribution company. It's in the interest of the customer. So it's a win-win, for all. So that is the way I think NEC has managed, the issue of the impact of the SBT on, those that may fall in the category that has been described. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tarab, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned, as part of the SBT that was approved in November, we also approved a revised capping order. So for customers that are metered, their tariffs are set based on caps, and the caps were set based on average level of consumption by customers within the same feeder that they are operating. So based on that, and if that feeder has been categorized in band A, B, C, D, or E, then the average tariff will be there. Yes, it's still estimation. We don't, the right place to be is that all customers will be metered, but that will be done over time. And like I mentioned, since the implementation of the federal government's national mass metering program, nearly about 400,000 meters have been deployed between November to date. And even we're trying to ramp up the delivery to ensure that by the end of July, over 1 million meters are installed. And continuously, this metering program will be delivered, is going to kick in and will continue. So we hope that by the end of next year, all customers, majority of the customers are metered. And that is where the market goes. Like also she mentioned that, I mean, if customers have prepaid meters, it's very easy and flexible for them to make their payments. I don't have to wait at the end of the month, or maybe we have some of the small scale businesses. Every day they go, they can vend 500 and then use it for their business for that day. Out of the cash collections for that day, they will set aside another 200 or 500 to use it for the following day. So I think it improves the liquidity of the distribution companies instead of waiting at the end of the month to bring a huge bill. Oh, I don't have money to pay. So that now creates illiquidity in the system. And because you are bringing a huge bill for a business that is operating on a day-to-day basis, and they cannot pay that monthly bill at once. So I think that's the end state is that all customers will be metered, and it's clear that before new connections are done, customers must be metered, and where customers reject meters from the discos, the distribution company will have to disconnect those customers from the service they're getting from the distribution company. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So still on the subject of metering, Mrs. Delano, how does AEDC checkmate meter bypass by customers? There's a comment that says, sometimes with the aid of DISCO employees, knowing that this is a major source of revenue leakage. So how is this activity checkmated? Thank you.
So there are different ways that you can checkmate meter bypasses. Thankfully, there is a regulation on unauthorized access to electricity, that was provided that gives a good framework, for compensation and penalties to be imposed on those who engage in these activities, other than even the provisions of the Penal Code, the Miscellaneous Offences Act. There are a lot of, we have sufficient provision, at least for now, within the law that allows us to bring those people to book. So electronically, you can do it using a smart meter. There are smart meters that, allow you, to, they send information. There are two-way systems that send information. You can send information to the meter can send information to you, and depending on the way it's programmed, it can alert you when something goes wrong. So you can do it electronically. Now you can also do it using revenue protection officers. That is widely used in Nigeria, and even in South Africa. You find that when you migrate to having mostly metered customers, then you must correspondingly increase the number of revenue protection officers that will be going to check those meters, at least until you get to the point where those meters can be monitored electronically. And so they go, and they're very sophisticated ways that even the so-called high and mighty in society engage in meter bypass right from the construction process. So it's an evolving process that also needs you to keep on training your officers to be able to identify cases of bypass. I think one of the easiest ways is to use a clamp, to test the load, that goes into the premises in order to make an assessment of the energy that is going in. But even there are more sophisticated methods. And as I said, we are having to continue to train, our own staff on ensuring that they are able to identify and bring these people to book. Interestingly, we have quite a number of convictions have been obtained, for people who have engaged in meter bypass, unauthorized access, meter tampering, and things like that. So it's a continuous, it's definitely a continuous process. And there's something else, using a management information system. When you analyze the data of energy consumption of people within a particular area, obviously you have those who consume very high, you have those who are in the average consumption, and it will also throw out, those whose consumption levels are extremely low. Now that's a red flag. Once you have somebody, there's been maybe the revenue protection officer has not arrived at the premises, you don't have a smart meter there, but the data allows you to trigger a visit to those premises, that this is unusual. The average consumption for this particular group of customers is too low for somebody that is living in that area. And so it will trigger a visit by the revenue protection team to the premises unannounced, to go and inspect those meters. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer. And Mr. Tarab, I have two questions, or a couple of questions for you. So I'm just going to read them out, and you can take them sequentially or otherwise. So there's a question that says, has NEC begun to find the discourse for non-compliance with the service-based tariff regime, where NEC finds instances of such or based on reports from the customers? Are there any case studies to buttress this fact, if it is actually in existence? That's the first question. And then the second one, I'm just going to take it so that, because it touches on metering, so that you can take it at once. So the second one says, we understand that NEC stopped customers from payment for their prepaid meters under the Meter Asset Provider Scheme. This was to drive forward the free metering under NMMP. Can we not have the two options open for customers who can either pay and get metered within a time frame, or if not, wait for the government's free metering?
Thank you very much for the wonderful question. The one in terms of penalties, like I mentioned earlier, for this first period, the Commission is already reviewing the data, and then at the end of the review, before the minor review is concluded, appropriate compensations that for relevant customers will be passed on, and that will be captured in there. But subsequently, as we fully automate some of the distribution transformers, because those ones, because the current metering is at the feeder level. So, but there are some customers that can still be, the feeder may be on, there's a supply of the feeder, but at their own distribution transformer, there's no supply. So when all these metering DTs are fully metered and automated, these things will be done on a monthly basis continually as from July onwards. So I think that's what we're expecting to happen. On the issue of payment for meters, with the policy on ground on National Mass Metering Program, the MAP was suspended. That is the meter rollout payment for meters through the meter asset provider regulation has been suspended, but we had issued a consultation paper on how to modify the regulation. And we have received several comments. The commission is about concluding its review, and an updated regulation will be given. And each question raised, why not having the two, is being examined as part of this review as we speak. That was in the consultation paper. So the commission decision will be issued within the next weeks, a few weeks from now. A revised regulation on the MAP will be issued as a feedback of the consultation. And we've seen both claims from customers and other stakeholders on the need to have the two to run concurrently, the national mass metering and the MAP to run concurrently. It's a review that is ongoing. So once the commission has made its decision, that will be published and customers will be aware on the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarab. So we have quite a few hands raised. We'll start with Kleinworth Young. Please go ahead and raise your question. Thank you. And please state who the question is being directed to. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sorry. This is to both executives. If the estimate is correct, we have about 30 million plus customers connected to the national grid. And the gentleman rightly said that based on the rollouts of the prepaid meters, or the meters, they are looking at about 1 million by the end of the year. 30 million to 1 million. It looks like a very uncreative target to set, owing to the fact of the amount of money that's being pushed out by the federal government. Shouldn't we be looking at 5,000 per disco a month? I think it's still a small target to meet. They can do better. I'm sure none of them would take that as a personal KPI if it was a KPI on their job description. It's quite low. And I think we have a manpower. And I think right now the federal government, I believe, have provided the funds for the metering. So why is the target that lower? Why is the regulatory body allowing that to happen? Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Tarab, do you want to go first, and then Mr.
Yes.
Delano will speak?
Yeah, I think thank you very much, client, for your wonderful question. The record we have currently is not 30 million customers connected to the national grid. At the national grid, we have only about 12 million customers connected to the grid, so it's not 30 million. So there's still a lot of room for providing access to a number of customers that are not connected to the grid yet. So that is part of the performance improvement plan reviewed and approved by the DISCOs. And I mentioned on average about 6,005 meters have been deployed by the DISCOs weekly, not monthly. But you have some DISCOs because of their higher efficiency deploying up to like 16,000 a week. So this is on average across all the DISCOs, as what I mentioned. And because there's an amount provided for the phase 0 of the national mass metering, which is 1 million meters. And that was meant to mop up the available meters within the country and in the warehouses of meter manufacturers, suppliers, and vendors that have been registered and vetted by the commission and also visited to verify that those meters exist. Then the second phase, a huge, in phase one, a procurement process will be put in place to procure additional meters of up to over 5 million meters, so which is what we expect to move on. And this one phase zero was constrained, earlier some questions were earlier mentioned was the impact of COVID. Part of why we are restraining to the 1 million is that is the meters available, and because of the impact of COVID last year, a number of the meter manufacturers could not get some of their supplies and inputs to ensure that the meters are available. So that's what we have. But like I mentioned, a review of the meter asset provider regulation is ongoing. Once it's approved, and that also provides for other meters that will come not necessary to the national mass metering. If that is the result of the approval, then more meters will be deployed much quicker than expected. So I think that's what we are having. But overall, we hope to close the metering gap within the next 2 years. Like I mentioned, about 60% of the customers are not meters. So we hope that that will be closed much quickly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Delano, if you just quickly provide your input.
What I was going to say was that, I mean, it's a good question, and it's a critical question, you know, in terms of what is required to even make our customers comfortable and, well, everybody in the value chain, their lives a lot easier. But there's also the need, you know, he's mentioned supply chain, you know, challenges, the impact of COVID, and even local capacity, the ability to ramp up the number of meter installers that can do a good job. It's not just about installing a meter, but installing a meter properly, not a meter that is bypassed. And so there is a process. As he said, there are, you know, some discos that are very aggressive and have been able to scale up the process. And as we progress, you know, with the installations, you would see more of this. So I think it's a question of time, but expecting, you know, all the meters to land and be implemented or installed at the same time is not going to happen. Yes.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Delano. So by rounding up this session, we'll just take the last question from Musa, who has his hands raised. Please go ahead with your question. I'm not sure he's still there. Okay, so I have a question, Mrs. Delano, based on, so with what other options have been leveraged on by ADC? And let me direct to ADC, because you can't really speak for the other discourse. What other options have been leveraged on to raise financing for associated investments required to improve service standards, such as sub-franchising, embedded generation? Because I know in the order put forward by NEC, they had proposed other mechanisms that the discourse can leverage on, rather than just sit and wait for the government. So what other mechanisms or options have been explored by ADC?
And well, interesting question. And ADC is quite innovative in terms of exploring the available frontiers. In terms of financing, before now, it was a bit challenging to raise financing because of the state of the disco balance sheets, the extent of debt, you know, that was on those balance sheets. You know, the process is still being made to migrate all those debts, you know, away from the balance sheet. So that would have impacted any reasonable investor that wanted to put money in a disco. He would look at, number one, the tariffs, and oh, are these tariffs cost reflected? Would my money come out? You know, and you know, so those are, and then you look at the balance sheet, obviously, of the disco. Am I going to put my money in here? You know, so those are the factors that would influence any seasoned investor or a lender who wants to invest in a disco. So hopefully there's a lot of opportunity, you know, for us to get more financing. You know, as time goes on with all these initiatives and the effects of them being seen in the performance of the discos. But you've mentioned, before now, even while it was challenging, one of the ways that AEDC had raised financing was through even vendor financing, supplier credits. That's more expensive than, the normal financing, but with supplier credits, because they see that, okay, they will get paid because of the impact of the job that they're doing for you. So they lend you money at, higher rates of interest. And you mentioned franchising. That's a very interesting model, which we are exploring. And we have a couple of pilots, that are ongoing, in order to fine tune, the process, because even in the franchising guidelines, there is some flexibility that was given, to the distribution company to design a framework that will work, for it. So that's where is in the pipeline we're exploring. We are also, engaging with other maybe Gencos in terms of getting into embedded generation. So we're having those discussions. We are quite keen, to maximize, the benefits and the available frameworks that are within the NESI in order to make sure that AEDC's performance stays on top.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Delano. Well done to AEDC. Unfortunately, we can't take any further questions. I see a lot of comments on metering. So I'm employing the Electricity Hub to organize a session on that, because metering is a front burner topic in Nigeria, and it will always be like that until the issue is resolved. So we're moving on to recommendations, conclusions, and closing remarks. So I would allow Mr. Tarab for 3 minutes to give statements, and then Mrs. Delano would conclude and give her own closing remarks as well. Thank you so much. Please go ahead, Mr. Tarab.
Oh, thank you very
so
much. Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss SBT, service-based tariff. It's we have already seen from inception to date significant improvement in services to customers and also improved liquidity in the sector. And with all the implementation schemes put in place in terms of either its national mass metering program or other initiatives like the last issue raised by AEDC in terms of cleaning up their balance sheets to transfer the sector historical tariff shortfalls to the Nigerian Electricity Liability Management Company, NEMCO, so that they can have the capacity to engage and to attract new investors to help in financing their performance improvement plan, which is key towards ensuring that customers get improved services. And as they get improved services, these customers will be migrated to higher service bands. And as they are migrated to higher service bands, the improvement in the liquidity of the sector is there. So it's a continuous cycle of improvement and engagement, which we believe we need to continue to carry on. So thank you very much. We appreciate all the questions that have been raised. And we expect customers to raise their concerns whenever the service levels do not meet the expected minimum standards, and complain to the DISCO, to the Commission, so that the Commission is aware of what's happening. And when the crowdsourcing app is made available, so that customers can go directly and lodge complaints, so that the DISCO is on the platform, the Commission is on the platform, so that customers' service attained. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tarab. So, Mrs. Delano, you have 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank you for an interesting, very interesting 1.5 hours, discussing the service-based tariff. And also just to mention that there are quite a number of initiatives that are coming into the sector at this point in time. And we will begin to see the effects of these initiatives in the short to the medium term. I believe in celebrating milestones. So whilst, it's not all there yet, we're not there yet, we're not at 100%, but for the improvements we have seen, we learn from those processes, which ones worked, which ones did not. And then we fine tune the process and we move on. But these initiatives like the national mass metering, the phase 0 is already underway. The phase 1 is upcoming. The NEMS that is supporting the CAPEX and OPEX financing for the distribution companies, the intervention in TCN, all of these initiatives, if only we would, as consumers, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves as much as possible. There's quite a bit going on, and I would also encourage our customers also to support the process. Don't engage in meter tampering, don't engage in bypasses. Where you see somebody who is doing that, please notify their whistleblowing lines, notify the discos, as quickly as possible. There's also expected Siemens financing and potentially from World Bank. So all these initiatives, the idea is to make it a reality that, services actually improve. And I had a funny story about one geographical location in Lagos where after they started getting about 20 hours per day and were paying, they were and say, please, we don't need that much, electricity. We want to get to that point where it's the customers that will be telling us, enough, we've had enough. Just give us 20 hours per day and we're fine. That's our, objectives as a disco, and we look forward, to arriving, at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Delano, and thank you, Mr. Tarab. It has been a very insightful session, and I really enjoyed moderating this session. So I will now hand over to the Electricity Hub to take over the engagement as we conclude.
Thank you so much, ABA. It's been an insightful session. Thank you so much, Mr. Delano and Mr. Abba as well. I just want to give a few housekeeping rules. If you're not on our Facebook page, do follow us on Facebook. There, this session is going to be there in case you want to catch up. We also have a Telegram platform. Follow us there as well. We're on LinkedIn. Everywhere else, there's going to be a report of this dialogue circulated. So if you're not subscribed, do subscribe to the Electricity Hub as well. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely evening.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much as well.
Thank you.